Hi everyone. So today I wanted to talk about, one of our more overlooked subjects sometimes, especially when you get into the deep sky astronomical hobby, is the moon. So a lot of times the moon is really just the thing that's in our way, that's causing too much light pollution. Got to wait for new moon or when the moon's under the horizon, all that kind of stuff. But don't forget about it. It's there, and there's a lot of neat stuff you can do with it. So to start off with, very easily you can take nice full color shots of the moon, and in this case, just boosting the saturation a little bit. What great little color variations you can see going across here. But what happens a lot of times when you have either a smaller scope or you put, a large, color camera on your telescope, even if it's a little bit higher focal length, is that big image here looks really good. But the more you zoom in, the quicker it starts to break down in detail and things get really pixelated. So, what I'm going to talk about today is how you can kind of have the best of both worlds. Getting some nice moon images, but also, if you want, getting some higher focal length shots that actually work together really well, that can be combined at the end of the day into a moon mosaic. So, to do this, we're going to be talking about kind of two pieces of software, Auto Stackered and Microsoft's Image Composite Editor, or ICE. So to start off with, when you're taking your moonshots, you will do acquisition through one of a number of different pieces of tools like Sharp Cap or Fire Capture that I'm not going to go into today. Those could be their own subject on how best to acquire your images. But once you've acquired your set of planetary, which is typically some sort of video file, so it can take tons and tons of high frame rate images, then one of the best tools to use is a tool called Auto Stackered. And this is really designed to process through that video file, analyze each frame in it to figure out which ones are of the highest quality. Then you can choose a certain number of those frames, or a certain percentage of them, to stack together, and they'll use that to come up with a better image than what you probably would have gotten as a single capture. So if you've got your image file and you get AutoStacker, which I'll put a link to this in the description, it really is a three-step process. You open the file, you analyze the file, and you stack the file. And you really just have a couple of things to think about in each step. So to start off with, let's open the file. So I actually put on my desktop here a sample file. And so what I did with this one is this is using my 8-inch SCT, and just sticking my guide camera, which is a QHY 53290, which is a really good guide camera, but it's also a really good planetary camera, onto it as the prime focus. So instead of guiding, it's now my main camera for this subject. It's got a few benefits to that. These guide cameras that double as planetaries have much smaller sensors. And so what that means is, if you were using a larger sensor, like a 4/3 or something, that you might see for like an ASI 1600 or something like that, the sensor is very large for capturing a deep sky object. So if you wanted to look at an up close view of the moon, you would need higher focal length scopes and things like Barlow's and stuff like that to magnify it. However, with a smaller sensor, just because it's looking at a smaller part of the image, it's already effectively zoomed in a certain amount without having to add any other pieces of equipment to it. And then plus, most of the time, these guide camera, planetary camera chips have much smaller pixels, which can help them get more detail. Last thing on those guide cameras, they tend to be smaller total image sizes. This one can only do 1920 by 1080, so essentially a high def picture for each one it does, versus a larger camera that might have 4,000 pixels on the side in comparison to the 1900. So lower total resolution, But honestly, all of that couples together to give you an effectively more zoomed in image without really having to do anything special or add extra pieces of equipment like Barlows and things to the mix. A lot of times with the Barlow on the moon is that you may be using a little too much Barlow, and you may just be blurring your image out a little bit more than you wanted to. So, all of this couples together for, those, and also, I'm sorry, those smaller files, because it is a smaller file size, lets you get faster frame rates. So more images in less time, which feeds everything down the mix here. So all that couples to making these guide cameras that double as planetaries a really good option, especially for doing these tight-in moonshots. So this is the Sea of Tranquility here. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But so now I've got my file, and I need to answer a couple of questions here at the beginning. So the first one is, am I looking at a planet? Because this works really well for Jupiter, Saturn, things like that. Nope, I'm looking at a surface. So I'm going to pick a surface. And then it's asking, okay, where do we want to, put our image stabilization anchor? Where do we want to be looking for if this image is moving throughout the screen, right? Right here is probably not all that great because there aren't a lot of features for it to lock onto. So I'm going to go ahead and control click on this white point here so it can really, it stands out against that background, and it can kind of watch as things are moving in there. Improved tracking you can turn on or not depending on how jumpy your recording is and how much time you want to spend on it. Expand or cropped, this is the important one. So everyone's image is probably going to move a little bit. Mine certainly was throughout the couple minutes it took to take the video here. Do I want this to kind of stack in every frame it's got and give me that whole area, even though some of those ones that maybe were only in for the first 10% of the time may not have as much detail? Or do I want it to crop in to only what it kept? And in my case, I'm going to say I want it cropped in. I don't want raggedy edges and things like that. So crop it in. Quality estimator, I never mess with either of these two, but I'm sure that can be helpful in certain circumstances. And then lastly, where are you determining the quality on? Global would be the entire frame. And then local is based on these alignment points, and we'll get to the alignment points in a minute. Essentially, it's kind of a speed difference. I normally like the alignment point one and let it take a little bit more time to run through because I feel like it gives a more evenly clear image. But to be honest, I don't know that it makes much difference. So once you've answered these questions on the opening, what are we looking at here, and how do we want to estimate the noise? Then we just click Analyze. So let's go ahead and do that. And then what it's going to do is it is going to run through all the frames in that video file and do a set of things to it. You honestly don't need to know what any of these mean. It's just giving you a status as it goes through. It's pretty plug and play on it. But it does take a couple of minutes to run through this. So I'm going to let it run through it, and then we'll come back once it's done doing its analysis piece. All right, so the analysis is done here. You can see down in the corner approximately how many minutes it took, although I did get up as well. But depending on how large your video file is, how many frames you took, as well as the resolution. So if you've got a 20 megapixel camera going through and taking frames, it's definitely going to take longer than something like this that's running at essentially 1080p for its frame gathering. And then once the analysis is done here, it's going to give you this graph. You don't really need to know too much about this graph other than it is estimating the quality on these various pictures here, right? And it's gone through and figured out where the anchor point, where if I need to stabilize this so that this spot's always in the same spot, how to do that. So all that work is pretty much done here for the most part. Now you need to answer a few other questions. So the next thing on here, double stack reference. This kind of improves the quality in general, so I normally just leave it clicked on. Auto size this, so it automatically determine, mouse over, the number of frames of the reference frame. So these I normally just kind of leave checked on by default, and it tends to do a pretty good job. And then on the other side, you start walking down this side. So what do I want my output to be? Do I want a TIFF, a PNG, if I just want to take the output and post it straight on Facebook or something, or a FIT file? Normally I leave it as TIFF because sometimes I'll take these into Photoshop or other places, and so the TIFF tends to have a little bit more compatibility with total image quality. Then this is really the important part, either number of frames to stack or the frame percentage to stack. So typically you don't want to stack everything, especially if the quality shows that a lot of these are a little bit lower quality. Maybe they were blurrier or there was some motion in it, that kind of thing. So you normally want to pick a percentage. This has a lot of different rules of thumb from different people. Some will say just take the top 50%. Some will say take 10 or 20%. Some will even say if you took, say, a 5,000 or 10,000 image video, you do just 5% or 1%. Really you can kind of play around with this to taste and see what the quality differences are based on what you were taking the shots of. Especially for the moon, 10% has been working fine for me for what I've been taking. So you fill that in for the percentage. That's what I normally like because it's normally easy. I don't need to remember exactly how many frames I had. I'm just taking the top 10%. But if you wanted to put it in as a number, a particular number, you could certainly do that. Next, sharpen, blend, raw in for 50%. Normally, I have this put in as well. So this gives you, sometimes an over sharpened image can look very artifacty, and this can kind of help blend things together so it doesn't look so bad there. Save in folders, up to you, it just changes on when it's saving. This one, the RGB align, is for color images only, but that can be super helpful. So if you've got any kind of atmospheric distortion when you took your image, RGB align will help out with those kind of red or green fringes that are going on. It's not going to be as good on the sharpening as what you might get with doing a monochrome with red, green, and blue filters, but for especially any kind of color camera or just trying to make it easy on a color image, that's a good one to have checked. You can kind of add in some stuff here. I normally don't do these stack name options much, but if you need to do some things for your naming convention, you certainly can. And then you get into these drizzle options and resamples. So resample effectively is going to make your images kind of 2 times bigger. So that can be good if you're taking a very small, like 640 by 480 image and you want to be able to blow it up without looking as pixelated. And then drizzle is for when you're undersampling things. So especially if you are, shooting Venus, and it's going to be very pixelated because it's so small in your camera sensor. You might want to do a 1.5 or even 3x drizzle, and that will take those images and help get it to the point where some of those more pixelated areas will smooth out a little bit more. In my case, this is pretty well sampled. The level that I'm zooming in at, I'm not noticing a lot of pixelation, so I'm going to leave the drizzle off, and I'm not going to resample it either because I kind of just want to keep it at the file size that it's at. Especially if I'm going to do a mosaic, I don't want to resample it because that just makes my file size even bigger. And having a bunch of those panels with a bigger file size just equals a huge file at the end of the day. So that's really it. But you can see my number 3, my stack is grayed out. I'm not ready to stack yet. There's one other thing I need to do, and that's in this preview window here. So in the preview window, it's nice that you can step through your individual frames and kind of drag through and watch as it's showing you this is my lowest quality one, and I can tell it's pretty low, right? It's super blurry. This one, it says it's my highest quality one, and that actually looks pretty sharp, so not so bad there. But really what I need to do in here, and you can play around with some of these other options and things, but really it's these alignment points that we're looking for. So you can kind of manually draw these in. I never do that. I always do this AP grid. And so it starts with these options here. What size of alignment points do I want to have? And an alignment point is just a box. It's going to draw on the screen in different places where it's kind of chopping your image up into pieces of it that it's going to align up and try to sharpen up. So smaller to big, the smaller one you have, the more boxes you're going to have. The more boxes you have, the slower your process goes. So normally I pick something kind of in the middle here, unless I'm dealing with a very big image, in which case I may go to a bigger box. But let's look at what 100 would be. And then I'd say place AP grid. Click that and you can see it's drawn all these little boxes all the way around here. The minimum brightness can be helpful sometimes if it's ever placing these, like let's say you had a planet in the middle and you notice it's starting to place boxes outside of it because of some glow or something. That's where you play around with that minimum brightness. And it's just choosing where are the boxes going to be. And in general, you want to make sure they're kind of covering everything. I'm going to go ahead and do big boxes on this one so it runs a little faster. And hopefully each box is going to have something in it that it can help line up on as it's going through here. And so once you feel like, okay, yeah, I'm capturing just about all of the surface that I want here, now you notice after I place that grid, I've got the ability to stack. And then literally just hit the stack button. And once again, this is one of those things that you just kind of let it run and go. And it'll take a few minutes. It may take an hour if you have a pretty large file or a ton of access points or a variety of things that can kind of mess you up there. So I'm going to go ahead and once again kind of pause this while it goes through and does its deal to line these up, and we'll take a look at the output once we come back. All right, and it's done. So we've got a stack now. Great. Where is it? Right? That's the first question that always comes out with this. So the big thing is to remember, saving in folders or not, it's putting it back where you originally got it from, right? So it's now going to create a new folder here to be auto stackered and percentage to keep 10. By the way, one last thing, these multiple ones, if you wanted to have it do a 10, a 5, a 20, and a 50, you could put them in here and it'll do it all in one big pass. But so click in here and then you get two images. First one is its raw stack in. I'll zoom in a little bit. So this is just what it came out with in general without doing any other actions. And then the next one is what it sharpened to. So hopefully you can see this is much sharper than what we originally had in there, with a lot more detail than any of the individual frames. So very good job. Not a lot to make choices on other than just putting those access point grids in, just open, analyze, and stack to get this kind of result here, which is great, especially if you're just going for a single image. And importantly, when looking at versus the color image here, between these two, you can see this level of detail I was able to get out of the stacked image, right? This is Sea of Tranquility, and I'm able to make out these three small craters here that, along with Mulkey and kind of finding your way from Theophilus, that allows you to kind of pinpoint where the Apollo 11 landing site was. So this was a really fun picture to play around with. However, if I zoom in on that same area, and this is also stacked using auto stacker, it's just using my full color camera. If I come down into that same area and kind of go to my maximum zoom here, I can, there's Theophilus like in the other one. Here's that crater there. But I'm having a real hard time making out these over here the same way that I did looking at it over here. And so you can tell just how much detail gets lost from that larger camera, larger camera sensor and the RGB channels, right? That kind of stuff, that bare matrix, versus using the smaller sensor with the black and white here. So that's great, that you could be, done there if you want to be there and take loads of great, high quality surface images. These were all taken with my 8-inch SCT telescope. So, very similar to what a lot of us have when we start off here. But can we take it further? And the answer is yeah, we certainly can take it further. So you can go through and process up, you can take different pictures of different parts of the moon and that kind of thing. And you can end up making a mosaic. And so just tabbing through different photos that I took, and this was all in one night, just pointed an area for a couple of minutes and let it record video of that area. And these are all outputted after auto stacker, and they all came out sharpened up very nicely, and look great individually. But what if I want to put them all together? That's where our next piece of software comes in, the Microsoft Image Composite Editor. So the Microsoft Image Composite Editor is a free program, just like AutoStacker, and it specializes in panorama images. It was really meant for folks that took a lot of images of like a cathedral or something and stitching them all together into one really great looking panorama very quickly and easily. Came out of Microsoft Labs. Also works really well for lunar and astro photos. So, this is one of my main tools of choice whenever I'm going to try to stitch things together. So really it's even easier than auto stacker. So start by saying new panorama from images, and it's going to ask you what images are you looking for. So in here I have all of these individual frames that I took. I'm just going to select them all. I don't care about the order, don't care about the file names, any of that. It lets me sort them if I want, and then I've got them all in here. And then really I need to make a couple of decisions. And really the couple of decisions I need to make is how soon do I want to hit the stitch button. Everything is just set on automatic. I hit stitch, and let's see how long it takes for it to create a mosaic. And done. That's it. Now I've got a mosaic. Stitched together 17 of 20. The other ones that didn't stitch, I actually took a few with a Barlow on that were zoomed in a little more, and it just didn't use those because it already had that info. So this is all 17 of those images stitched together into a mosaic. And I can zoom in here and look. Don't have the ability to really drag around on this, unfortunately, in this view, but you can tell, it's kept that quality, all the way down in there, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find a seam or a blur of, gradients or anything like that anywhere in this image. It does a fantastic job aligning and stacking things. And you can always come in and rotate it around however you'd like, that kind of thing. Now if you notice, I didn't capture everything on the moon here. I had some gaps, and I'm going to talk about that in just a sec. But let's say you do this and you have your mosaic. You could be happy with it as it is, leave these in. Hubble has these kind of blocks out of it, right? Or you could decide to crop it in. That's the next step. So you can come in here to the crop area, and you can kind of go through and decide how you would like to do a crop. It gives you this little box on the side here, and you can just kind of drag that in to however you would like to crop your image, that kind of thing. I think I would normally like to hit the auto crop button and see what it comes up with. And it's picking an area that has everything in it, but I can certainly just adjust this around if I wanted, say, just an area that isn't going to have anything jaggedy or anything like that. And then once you have it, you can hit export. There is one feature in here called autocomplete. I'm going to show you this because it'll freak you out the first time you use it if you have an image like this. And really what it's going to try to do is fill in these gaps. And if it's something like the moon, you don't want it to do that. If you had the moon and maybe just had like a little cutout here or something, then maybe it would work well there. But let's see what it does when we hit autocomplete, just for fun. uh-oh, it looks like someone's been attacking the moon, right? So it did its best to try to fill in gaps with other info from the frame, and that can work really well on like patches of blue sky or something, but not so much on the moon. But luckily, you can always just unclick that checkbox and get back to where you were. But so let's say I did want to crop it in to this area here, then I can just go to the export, and there's my mosaic image, right? And from there, you can change the scale if you want, select from a pretty good variety of files, especially if you're going to take this into Photoshop later to mess with it. Either a TIFF works really well, or you can actually export it as a Photoshop document where what it'll do is it'll put a layer for each frame of the mosaic and a layer for its combined, which can be kind of fun to mess around with. But normally I'll just say TIFF image, export to disk. It'll ask where do we want to put it. I'll put it in, let me put it in this finals folder. And then you're exported. But as I said before, well, okay, maybe you change your mind on it. At any point in time, even after you've exported it, you can go back into the different areas. You can even come back in here. So like maybe if you wanted to see what it would look like without some of these. And you can see, kind of how we're missing some stuff from there. But as I said before, I've got these gaps in here, and maybe I don't want those in my final image. Is there any way to help out with that when I'm doing this mosaic? And yeah, actually you can. So let's remove everything here and start over from scratch. And let's add our mosaic panels back in. And then we know that we had some gaps. So what I ended up doing is I went back to this color image I took, and I knew that I had a chunk out of here and a chunk out of there and a chunk over here. And what I did is I literally just kind of cut out little pieces of these and converted them to black and white. And I did that in Photoshop, but you could do it in a variety of programs. I just cut them out. Now, the resolution isn't the same, but I'm just trying to fill gaps in my mosaic. Most of the mosaic's taken up by high-res images that I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. So I did little cuts out of that and made a folder called patches, and that's where I put these in here. So go back into ICE, and I'm going to add some images from my patches folder. So you can tell I'm not doing big chunks of it. I want just enough to fill those gaps and overlap enough so it can recognize them. So I've added those little pieces in there to fill out kind of the rest of the moon there. And then I go back and let it stitch again. And now I have a mosaic that makes its way all the way around the moon, right? And as we said, it's filled in, but at least at this resolution, right, I can't really tell much about those parts. So like this area here, I think was filled in. It's going to be a little bit blurrier, but my eye is really being drawn into these other areas. Same thing over here. This area is a little bit blurrier, right? But, kind of gets overshadowed by the detailed areas that I had in there. So just filling in the gaps with a wider field image. It could even be an image that you took at another point in time, so long as the moon brightness level kind of matches, should result in kind of filling those gaps nicely for you. So then once again, go to your crop, and then you can export in, maybe if you want to auto crop in, that kind of thing, or you're okay with, and maybe you only want just a minimum of edges. In my case, I exported this whole frame, and then because I know this area is all dead black, right, and these areas here, I wanted to be straight black, but you can tell there's subtle brightness changes across the board there. So I took this into Photoshop. I'm not gonna go through the whole process here, but basically I drew a circle selection around this and made everything else just straight black, right? And what that let me do at the end of the day is end up with a pretty nice finished result. So looking at my finals here, This was my final result. So you can see the sky ended up perfectly black. Down here is perfectly black, but it was all black to begin with. Everything else is my mosaic or my little bit of patchwork here, right? And zooming in on this, you can see that that detail really holds up pretty well. And so I can just kind of pan across, and then you can see where my patchwork came in, right? Definitely losing detail in this area. But once again, you can't really see the seam. You know, a little bit blurrier down here. This is the only place where I can find a hard seam, and I've got to really look for it. You know, otherwise, you know, the detail on this holds really, really nicely. So that's really it. That's walking through how to create, you know, a mosaic out of, you know, higher res, you know, more cropped in moon images. You know, and don't forget that, you know, simple things like rotation and framing can really help you take, you know, your images into an area that you really like them. Maybe you like kind of this kind of view. For me personally, my final that I posted out was like this because I really liked the long dramatic nature of it. You know, but the benefit of doing it this way, you know, obviously it's still faster to take, you know, a more zoomed out image, and you can certainly get a lot of detail in that. But to me, the big benefit of doing this is that I still had my cropped in ones. So, you know, once again, looking between, you know, this one here for the Apollo landing and this one, you know, I just don't have the detail to identify these three little mini craters here for Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin to be able to find that, you know, and, you know, this is a particular use case, but maybe you have your favorite parts of the moon or things you want to look around in. You're just going to get more resolution, you know, on that final image if you're starting with something that's going to be looking at it more closely in that way. So that's really it for this time. You know, so going through Auto Stackert and the Microsoft Image Composite Editor, two free tools that can really help you out taking images of the moon. And this is something anybody can get started with, right? If you have a DSLR, you can bring those images in here too and do the same kind of things with it. You know, small telescope, large telescope. The moon is kind of a great target for just about everybody. Even a camera and a lens, you can do some great moon shots. Probably won't need a mosaic with that kind of scenario, but you know, the moon's a great target no matter your skill level on any of this. So that's it for this time. Until next time, I encourage everyone to keep thinking about every kind of object you got out there. There's all sorts of stuff in our, you know, kind of boundless universe, and I wish everybody clear skies. Thanks.